Welcome to this WARPTalk podcast.
I'm Matt Smith.
And I am Bruce Thompson.
And together we're taking you on adventures in cybersecurity. We hope you enjoy the episode.
Well, Matt, what should we talk about then?
Not these fantastic chairs?
Well, we can, but I don't think there's too much to say other than they're quite colourful.
Well, all right, moving swiftly on.
I think we should.
Yeah, Knapweed, what's happening there?
Knapweed, well, I mean, that's an interesting one on a range of sort of levels, really. So going back 2 or 3 years, that was all-consuming, certainly of my time and a lot of other people's time. And of late, I think what's happened there is that the Information Commissioner's Office has picked up or become more focused around the remit of looking after people's data, with the police looking after criminal activity in the NCSE, doing nation state. ICO more focused around people's data, and we're having lots of conversations with them, Matt, just around handing over what we're doing over this year to them, and them effectively doing a Knapweed.
And do you think this is because they are more interested in doing a similar kind of thing? Is that why they are so interested in the Knapweed work?
I think they were looking to do something like it, but I don't want to do them a disservice, obviously, but I think they had like a Knapweedy idea, and then they sort of bumped into the fact that somebody had already been doing it for the last couple of years and doing it fairly well. And it's not just the things that are surfacing through WARPTalk with the daily announcements. It's the other stuff that goes on in the background with the Knapweed Fusion team and the people involved with that, who really do the hard yards of keeping an eye on the dark web, tracking the attacks, getting the file lists out. I mean, only last week there was a major ransomware attack on a healthcare provider, and at that point, it felt back in late 2022 or early 2023, where we were scrabbling to get file lists out to people, and people were concerned about what data they may have, what emergency safeguarding requirements need to be in place. And if we think back, why Knapweed became a thing, it was because people weren't able to share this stuff quickly into the public sector, where our public sector colleagues needed to make decisions. So, we are handing over bit by bit to the ICO, and we are in that kind of, that sort of, I suppose, bit of Knapweed's life where it is an end game, but it's, I think, it feels like it's coming to a bit of an end. Yeah. But how that will finally manifest, I'm not quite sure.
Well, and I think the interest from the ICO just proves how valuable it is, isn't it? I mean, it's a good thing that they've shown that interest in it. It's such an important piece of work. But of course, I guess it leads on to another project, because over time we've thought, well, wouldn't it be nice to stop all this stuff in its tracks in the first place? And I guess that's where Tarragon came in.
It did. That was sort of March 2023, really, where I began to think, well, tracking all this sort of bad stuff happening on the dark web and all these ransomware attacks, it would be better if they hadn't happened. So how do you begin to stop a ransomware attack? And I think I'd go back to May 2017 and the WannaCry thing, and the excellent work of Marcus Hutchins at that point, where he could turn that particular attack off by interfering with the command and control mechanisms, which was the first set of data that Tarragon produced, when it made available a list of sites you shouldn't really go to that were associated with ransomware groups, but more importantly, a set of command and control bots that you could block from your corporate network going out to the internet. And I accept that work patterns have changed and people work from home or people work from anywhere, but that is still something that you might want to block, in so much as ultimately the ransomware attack would still be on the corporate network, in the corporate data center. or potentially in the cloud. And stopping data going to those botnets could theoretically stop the attack. Well, more than theoretically, if the data, if that network cannot log into that botnet to activate, then it's stopped. So that was the first set of data. The second set of data was through some open source research people that I'm in contact with, and we discovered that there's a whole pile of ransomware subcontractors, really, called Internet or Initial Access Brokers, so IABs for short. And these are the people that scan everything, your web servers, your external interfaces. They're at it 24/7 trying to find that gap. That little, I'll just set up a VPN for testing. Username, password, admin. Not everyone's done it, but a fair few people have. And then it's late in the day and you go home, and that's the exploit that's opened up.
So any opportunity to get in at all.
Yep, these IABs sell this data, about 1 million accesses for $1,500, which, but that 1 million accesses, a lot of them, if the ransomware gangs themselves will look at those 1 million opportunities, and a lot of them will be not what they do.
Yeah.
So hence the amount of scanning. So some would only want a VPN access, and others would want a different kind of access.
Right.
So, and even then, there's a sort of subset of processes that go on around once you've got access to the network, what's on the network? Can you detect any other defense on the network? Are there NIDS tools type working that might put you off taking that attack further? So, that aggressive data scanning was something else that people are picking up on and have been over the last sort of year it's been available. In fact, at one of the WARP meetings recently, that set of data, the aggressive scanning data, was used by a council in Devon, and I think it's saving them about 5,000 hits a day, which that begins to show you how much scanning there is going on for those interfaces.
Yeah, it's not insignificant, is it?
No, it's not. And I think that in itself is quite an achievement. Not that I'm sort of blowing my own trumpet here, but it's this data set which is, I think, again, one of the precursors. It's an active thing you can do. So you can stop the data going to these botnets. You can stop your network being scanned by these organizations. And bear in mind that tools like, the NCSC, ACD, early warning will tell you you've got a problem. But if you're dropping the IP addresses that are looking for these problems, then they can't find the problem even if you've got one. That's the benefit of it. So it's another layered approach on top of what you might be doing with the NCSC ACD dataset. It's something else you can do to proactively sort of stop those kind of attacks.
Yeah.
And those kind of scans sort of as the precursor to the attacks.
And these Tarragon feeds can be read straight into your firewalls?
Yeah, a little bit depends on the type of firewall. So there are the original design, because I was working with a network engineer who will remain nameless, but he knows who he is. And there's a lot of FortiGate kit in use within the UK public sector. Lots of other kit as well, but FortiGate has a particularly useful setup where it can read threat feeds and do them on a timed periodicity and at a time to live. So that was quite useful. So we built the initial set for 40. And then we've added other formats to the data to make it easier for things like Palo and Cisco. And in the last month, an excellent bit of work by one of the Southeast Government WARP members. He's come up with a way of reading these aggressive scan blocking data sets for Azure NSGs. That script is available, and we'll put it out with the notes for this podcast because I can't remember the link, but not all of it anyway. And it'd be boring sort of sitting here saying, HTTPS something or other dot whatever. But yeah, so we've now got it onto Azure NSGs. So that's happened in the last month or so, which is spring 2025, and what's great about that is that, somebody from within our own community has also sort of said, hey, look, I think I can code this in a PowerShell script. And lo and behold, it was ready a week later.
Yeah, fantastic.
So the more collaboration we get like that, the better. And if we can, sorry.
I guess this is the thing, isn't it? The whole Tarragon thing, you're aiming for this to be a community project almost.
Yeah, that's the way I see it. Because I think the value ultimately here is in a new data set that's literally again become available in the last couple of weeks. I've been sort of beavering away on this over the cold winter months, and it struck me that I could get all kinds of data, but the difficulty is distributing that data. So some people have got SIEM systems, a lot of people have got SIEM systems, not everyone's got one, I appreciate that, but if you have, you've probably got Sentinel, which is in wide use. Microsoft, more or less suggesting that if you take, a Microsoft tenancy on or a subscription on, then pretty much everyone sets up Sentinel as a proof of concept. So lots of Sentinel out there. There's lots of Level Blue, formerly known as Alien Vault, USM out there. There's people running things like Security Onion, and there are other SIEM systems. I'm not going to sit here and list them all. But how do you distribute indicator of compromised data out to all those different systems, because they've all got a slightly different way of ingesting the data? So, for example, there's no direct threat feed input into Level Blue or Alien Vault USM. Sentinel only really wants to work with a specific set of data providers, or have data specifically in a Sentinel specific format, and that's JSON or CSV, and within the CSV there are certain required fields that have to have a certain number of conditions met. So you suddenly head into this very complex jungle of, yes, you've got one indicator of compromise, one email address, Bilbo Baggins at reallybadorganisation.com. You want to share that with the public sector because you want to say, hey, look out for emails from this bad person. You've then suddenly got to take that data and write it out in multiple formats. Specific CSV formats, specific JSON formats, and it's just too much to do. So I started looking at MISP, which is a great tool, MISP, the MISP server process. MHCLG, our colleagues at the ministry, also looked at MISP, and they and I think we all concluded, along with our esteemed colleague, the program director at CTAG, Mr. Brett, Dr. Brett. I think we've all looked at MISP and concluded it's darn good stuff, but it isn't half complicated, and it eats a lot of people's time. So with this, I rediscovered OTX, the Open Threat Exchange. And this has the advantage of being easy to use. You can take that one email address, if that's the email address that sent your organization an email. You can open your OTX account, put that email address in, and then by linking it to the Tarragon OTX, it'll push it out to everyone that's subscribed to Tarragon. Now, this is easy peasy if you're using Security Onion or Alien Vault OSIM or any of the Level Blue Alien Vault USM products. You just get that feed straight away. That's easy peasy, that's met. So the next thing was getting that to work with things like Sentinel, and a little bit more complex. I was working with another security researcher, and they had some people who said they could work on it. They did. They got it working, but there was a little problem with the data sets, and it's taken a little bit of time to figure out how to get the specific Tarragon data set out of OTX and how you subscribe to that and get it into Sentinel. And it is broadly, if I'm honest, Matt, eaten a lot of time, because the documentation from both Microsoft and OTX Taxi, which is the taxi feed that it uses because the data's in sticks format, you can go and look all that stuff up, it's good learning, it was just awful. It was just awful. And I started reading the entire taxi documentation, 83 pages, one lost weekend, and I still couldn't get it to work. And in a moment of desperation, coming up to midnight on the Sunday evening, I thought, I've got to get this working because there's a WARP meeting coming up, and I want to talk about it at the WARP meeting. And I want to say I've got OTX working with Sentinel. And I had everything working, and I had the API key, I had the collection key, all set up in Sentinel. I could get this working if I was using it at the Linux command line, just couldn't get it working in Sentinel. And in a moment of desperation, at about 20 to midnight on the Sunday evening, the password field in both sets of documentation said, you don't need a password, password equals none. So I wasn't putting a password in, and you never guess what the problem was. I typed in desperation, none, hit enter, and it worked. So, shabby documentation, took a weekend of my life, but it was worth it. But we're now in a position with Tarragon where, going back to your question around community, and a shout out to James at a council somewhere in the middle of England. He's already started posting phishing data into OTX. And when I checked, following on from that success late one evening recently, that data is flowing through quite nicely. And that's where the community aspect comes in, is that if there are more people like James posting data, then this becomes a highly specific data set. And I think that's important because there are threat actors attacking the UK public sector. Now, if you are producing data for Sentinel on planet Earth, then you're producing that on a global basis. It's not theatre-based.
Yeah.
And this is the community angle here. If people are hitting gov.uk's, the chances are, if they're hitting that one, they're hitting another one. And so if we can get this data coming into Tarragon, and we can push it back out to SIEM systems, and we can push it back out to firewalls, then that data becomes highly theatre-specific to UK public sector. And that, for me, is the value here.
Yeah.
And I was talking to a couple of people, and they were saying, well, where do you see this Tarragon project going? And I said, well, I'm not sure. I think it's just a bit like flying a kite at the moment, which is, people like seeing kites fly. You look at those kites, they're marvellous. And, no one really sort of knows where Tarragon's going to go. And I'm the same for now. It's around, we get that community involvement, it'll kind of look after itself.
Yeah.
It doesn't cost anything, bar a little bit of time, and if people keep posting into it, once we've got all the setup done, it just kind of runs. So you've only got to do that Sentinel setup once. You've only got to bring that data into that firewall once, and as long as Tarragon keeps, producing the data, which it runs on a nice single server with some backup, and some failover. As long as that infrastructure keeps running, it's one of those things where you can do it once in your council, in your organisation, and it will just keep running and defending.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm in contact with MHCLG as well on their Defenders 1 setup, and they're certainly aware of it as well. So let's see where it goes.
And I guess that's what sets it apart, isn't it? As you say, it's that unique selling point for it is the fact that it looks after UK public sector.
Yeah.
And the more of the community that put into it, the more we'll get out of it.
The more value, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's not to decry away from taking a paying subscription with the likes of, Cisco Talus or Palo Unit 42 or any of those paid feeds.
Yeah.
They're also good because those global actors are going to be hitting up global infrastructure.
Absolutely,
and you're still part of that. But there is, specific stuff going on with UK public sector. In fact, one of the other Tarragon bits of work, of course, is the no-name DDoS warning.
Of course, yeah.
Which is highly specific because if gov.uk is lit by no-name, then we all get a warning out of that. Yeah. That pops up in the WARPTalk Slack group. And because of the link with the Computer Emergency Response Centre in Luxembourg that Tarragon's managed to strike up, we'll also get the individual attack strings being used for each bit of government that's being attacked. And that's another one where we've written the code, it's sitting there, it's like a jack in a box. The minute that no name light up the UK, that springs into action. And it's that idea with Tarragon of doing it once and once it's set up, it's good to go. And again, the community is quite important there.
Yeah.
Because with those no-name DDoS alarms, other members of our broader UK community can see who else is being hit, and they can jump on the phone or set up their own mini meetings. So certainly in the last wave of attacks, different ends of the country, we've got colleagues in Bradford and colleagues in Plymouth didn't know each other were being attacked until late in the attack, whereas now we can publish that data early on and they can jump on the phone and say, hey, look, what are you doing? Or set up their own mini kind of war room and have a quick conversation around what's working.
Yeah, it's the whole peer support thing, I guess, isn't
it?
It is.
Which
is what being part of a warp is all about. Really.
Yeah. And I think there's some good work also going on in Tameside as well. I think their network, I can't remember his job title, but one of their guys suddenly picked up on something which was there's a lot of UK-based addresses in there and started to do some work around blocking those in terms of the CIDR ranges.
Yeah.
And again, just sharing that information out with, say, colleagues in Bradford and Plymouth could have been quite useful.
Yeah.
Because it would have been the same IP ranges. So they had some of that data, but didn't know who else was involved.
Yeah.
Where this time round, if these no-name attacks come back, then we've got that covered.
Yeah.
Everyone can see who's being hit, so people can jump on with
better position.
Mutual aid.
Yeah.
And also from Tarragon and OTX, one of the benefits of OTX is, and again, a true story from the last range of no-name attacks, I was able to take data from 3 or 4 large councils that were being hit by no-name, put that data into OTX, and I got that instant analysis that told me 2 things. One was which IP addresses had been seen before, and OTX knew about, because it is the Open Threat Exchange, it's the biggest threat exchange on planet Earth. And there's lots of researchers contributing to that. So if you've got an IP address involved in a DDoS attack, you can see who else has spotted that IP address before and what it's been doing, which is quite useful. But more to the point, it showed me where the IP address was based. And in the first range of attacks in November, it was broadly Eastern European and splattered all over planet Earth.
Yeah.
But in the December attacks, predominantly, I'd say 70% UK based.
70%?
70%. In fact, I remember putting the data in and deleting it all because I thought that can't be right. And I retraced my steps to make sure I hadn't goofed up on the data. I have been known to goof up every now and again.
Surely not.
Well, what can I say? To err is human. So yeah, I retraced all my steps back to all the individual emails, did the whole piece of work again, put it in again and got the same result, at which point I was a bit surprised again. But yeah, that also shows us that the attacker here has changed or fine-tuned their attack vector. Obviously the measures we put in place the first time round have been reviewed back to those internet access brokers again. Mm-hmm. If you're dropping that data, then they can't see what you've been doing. The second time round, that they modified their attack. They lit the UK the weekend of 18th of January, but didn't follow through with an attack, which was quite odd.
Ah.
But having said that, that was the weekend that triggered me to write a little bit of code that does the Tarragon thing, that knows the early warning system.
Right.
That CTAG supported, actually. That was quite nice.
Yeah.
So CTAG sort of supported that piece of work.
So hopefully next time it happens, we'll be in a much better position.
Yeah. Well, better in so much as we know who's being attacked. Those people who are being attacked will know the attack strings that are being used against them.
Yeah.
So maybe they can make some adjustments on their WAFs or other measures they got in place. And also, warp operators can see which councils they are and potentially go and say, hey, look, is there any way you can get some of the IP addresses that are taking your services out? Mm-hmm. And can you send them to us? We'll do the analysis.
Yeah.
And we can push that data back out through Tarragon more or less in real time as we get it. And people can add those to their drop lists. We can surface that data really quickly,
right,
which is another major benefit.
Yeah.
It's
going to be fascinating to see how Tarragon develops, I think.
It is. And it's funny how these ideas sort of also, where we started talking about, how can we defend against ransomware attacks?
Yeah.
And here we are fighting off like, no name doing a completely different attack.
Yeah.
And also, getting that community involvement, which is important. It's where the warps come into their own with the warp leads and the ability to sort of coordinate those things locally, and then feed them back into Tarragon and push that data back out. It is the community effectively feeding itself here, and becoming a bit more self-sufficient on this. And I think that's important. Yes, it's good to have the top-down initiatives, from the regional governments and MHCOG and LGA and everybody else that gets involved. But the more stuff we can do on the ground for ourselves, then so much the better. And there is a lot of talent out there.
There is.
I go back to quick off the mark, James in the middle of England already providing lots of phishing data, the SegWarp member from Fairham who wrote the PowerShell code to update the firewalls. It's this kind of stuff which is having the real sort of benefits.
Yeah. So it strikes me that a lot of this work is kind of dovetailing into one almost.
By accident.
Well, yeah, it may be. What's happening with Zed?
Well, is Zed where it started? It feels like it. A long time ago. It's dovetailing into one because what we're dealing with here is cyber threats. So Zed really was around looking at the inbound threat from email. Who could send you phishing and spam emails. And Knapweed was kind of looking at the threat of having vast amounts of your organisation's data, all over the dark web, which is still the internet and people can look at it, and particularly the data of individuals who may need safeguarding. That was one of the major sort of focuses of the Knapweed work. And Tarragon grew out of that, yes, but it was always about cyber threat intelligence. And I suppose Knapweed and Zed are aspects of cyber threat intelligence. So it's kind of coalesced here. And maybe that's maybe if you start out in cybersecurity research, that's where you just end up anyway. Because ultimately it is all cyber threat you end up talking about, particularly if you're on the defence blue team side of things. And even if you're on the red team side, then you're still looking to exploit that cyber threat intelligence. So it's like all roads lead to Rome. Ultimately, I think this is the same sort of thing there, really. But Zed's still going. Zed underpins a number of projects. I think it underpins your work, Matt, with the
RAG reports.
The RAG reports. It's in use by an excellent tool called Zed to the Max, which was written by an NHS organisation in the Northwest, and it recently won an iNetwork prize.
It did.
So that was quite a pleasurable evening. And that just recognised, I think, the fact you can take a database of these people send bad email and you can do something with it, which is what they have done in the Northwest, and I think the system they're using, which is an Outlook plugin, is used elsewhere. So they take this bad data, and when someone writes an email, it just says, hey, look, when you get a response, double check it because, the sender may have a very poor email reputation. And I think that's a great use of the data. Yeah. And again, the odd thing there, I suppose, where Zed started was me having a conversation with, back to the community again. It was a conversation I had with the cybersecurity lead in Richmond when I was working over at Kingston and Sutton. And I'm going to call him Dave. Dave phoned me up and said, what are you doing? Now GCSX has come to an end with everything gov.uk. I said, well, not very much, Dave. The NCSC tell us gov.uk to gov.uk email. Why is it safe? And Dave said, but is it? I said, well, yeah, blah.
Well, actually,
yeah. So, given that I'd already written some code for the Socketing president to analyse DMARC progress, because that was a big thing going back 2016, 2017, 2018. I sort of added some extra bits to it, and that's where Zed came from. If we look at what Tarragon data feeds are available, then Zed features in there. Which is kind of not exactly full circle, but I think it goes back to the point you were making about, it does seem like everything's ending up with threat intel.
Yeah, and just going back to the Z to the Max project, which strikes me as quite as you say, a useful way of using the data. Have we seen that used anywhere else, or any other councils using that particular?
Yeah, I think within the NHS in the Northwest, I think there's 2 or 3 organisations using it.
Yeah.
That's great. And there are some other council adopters. Certainly, and again, these aren't shout-outs as such, but West Sussex have been a fairly big consumer of that tool, and they seem to be getting a lot of benefit from it, which again is great. Yeah. And I think it was that recognition of it being an idea that started in the NHS but grew into a broader project, which might have been one of the deciding factors in it picking up that award. The fact that it's that particular what can we call it? We can call it an app. Everyone loves an app these days. That particular app sitting on top of the Z database and being used, quite broadly, seemed to be one of the things that the judges quite liked. So.
Yeah, no, that's good. Well, that's been a good catch up.
Yeah, it has.
Anything else that we've missed?
Probably loads of things, Matt.
Absolutely. Well, we'll save that for the next one.
We will.
And we'll see you for the next podcast when we get around to recording it.
Okie dokie.
Bye for now.
Bye bye.